is why it is I'm running for governor today. And I'm very excited about the direction of our campaign right now. We're building quite a bit of momentum, have a lot of support not only from the grassroots, but a number of elected officials have come out and endorsed us, most frequently the chairman of the New Hampshire House Finance Committee and New Hampshire House Ways and Means Committee as well. And I feel like the reason why we're picking up so much of this support is because as voters start to hone in on this election, they're analyzing and looking at every candidate. They're saying, who has the best long-term vision for this state? Who has the most detailed economic plan for how New Hampshire is going to lead the way nationally in being the most economically competitive state in the country over the next 10 years? And when I say economically competitive, I mean in terms of job creation, good 21st century jobs here that are going to be high-paying and sustainable, in terms of economic development, delivering health care more affordably because we pay some of the highest health insurance premiums of any state in the country right now. Lowering electric rates, which is another thing that puts us at a competitive disadvantage right now because of our high electric costs. And making government more transparent, more accountable to the taxpayer. So all these things we have as challenges before us as a state. And there's a lot of candidates out there who are talking in rhetoric and platitudes about wanting more jobs, but you have to dig down deeper and ask, how are you going to actually create more jobs here in the state? And when I talk about my economic plan, it's guided by an undergirding philosophy that it's not state government that creates jobs, but it's state government that creates the environment and the atmosphere for good jobs to be created primarily in the private sector. So I want to talk about some cornerstones of my particular economic plan and how I think New Hampshire can become that most economically competitive state, and some of the challenges that are facing us right now and how I see we can overcome those challenges. Just before coming here tonight, I met with Joe Farrow, of course, who is the owner of the Tuscan Kitchen and is redeveloping that area in Salem right now. And it's amazing because talking to him, he was telling me some of the same things I'm hearing from small business owners all over the state, which is that New Hampshire has lost its competitive economic advantage. It's more advantageous today to own a business in the state of Massachusetts than it is in the state of New Hampshire. And we have to stop that trend. Now, one of the problems is our corporate tax rate. New Hampshire has the 5th highest corporate taxes, business taxes, in the entire country. And we already know the United States is the highest tax country, corporate tax country in the industrialized world. New Hampshire is the 5th highest in the United States of America, between our business profits tax and our business enterprise tax, which is a tax on payroll. We tax businesses today that don't even make a profit in the state of New Hampshire. And so I've said we need to ratchet down both of those taxes over the next 7 years. Because the thing is, we always manage budget to budget. We're always managing by crisis in our state. And again, we have to be thinking long term. We have to talk about a long-term vision for the state. So what I've said is the business profits tax, its current rate is 8.5%. We need to lower it to 5% by the year 2020 if we want to be more economically competitive. Same thing with the business enterprise tax. Its current rate is 0.75%. And I said we need to 2020. And then if you're a small business owner and you're doing $500,000 or less in revenue a year and you're not making a profit, exempting you entirely from having to pay that business enterprise tax. Because I don't think it's right that we're taxing small business owners who aren't making a profit, especially if you want to entice entrepreneurs to start businesses in the state of New Hampshire. If you're an entrepreneur, you're looking at all the different risk variables you're going to be taking on in those first few years when you're starting up a business. And you see, geez, the state of New Hampshire is going to tax me no matter what on that business enterprise tax, even if I don't make a profit. And so we need to make it attractive for companies and businesses and entrepreneurs to want to do business in this state. And that's one way we can make it very attractive, is by lowering that corporate tax rate. And before anyone says, well, okay, well, where are you going to find the revenues? How are you going to make up for the revenue that you're going to lose over that 7 years? Well, let me tell you a little story about what happened down in New York City when a guy by the name of Rudy Giuliani did this. He went into New York City. They had some of the highest corporate taxes there. And he went in and over 8 years started slashing those corporate taxes. And guess what happened over 8 years? Tax from businesses, tax revenue from businesses went up because your economic base expands. You have more businesses that are growing jobs, that are moving into the state. You're going to get more tax revenue over time than you would have had you kept the business tax rate exactly the same. In fact, because of this plan, Mayor Giuliani's endorsed my campaign. He's actually coming up to campaign with me in August, and I'm looking forward to that because I think it's a great model that we can employ right here in New Hampshire to not only get existing companies here to grow more jobs, but to move to New Hampshire as well. But that's only one part of the pie. Another piece is we have to deregulate small business. in the state of New Hampshire. We have so many regulations on small business. And again, talking to Joe earlier, he said something very interesting to me. He said, when I'm doing business in the state of Massachusetts, it's all about job creation. It's all about how can we help you. And this is in a very high tax state overall. But they're still thinking about how can we get more jobs to be created here. We're not thinking that way in New Hampshire right now, and it shows it through our business regulations. One example I've used quite often here in the state is a number of months ago I had an opportunity to visit and tour the Portsmouth Red Hook Brewery. And of course, Red Hook Brewery out in Portsmouth, they're the East Coast distributor. They're the distributor for the entire East Coast in Portsmouth, that Red Hook is, even though their headquarters is in Washington State. But right now, Red Hook was doing hundreds of thousands of dollars of business outside of the state of New Hampshire because we had this regulation on the books that said you couldn't brew certain flavors, certain sugars of beer in the state of New Hampshire. New Hampshire, by the way, has a growing craft beer industry in the state. In fact, not that long ago, a study came out that showed New Hampshire consumes more beer per capita than any other state in the country. I don't know what the reason for that is, but the reality is it's true. But you might say, well, how come this is so important? Well, Red Hook is the second largest brewery in the state of New Hampshire, only behind Anheuser-Busch. So what was happening is they were brewing all of this beer in the state of Washington. After they brewed it there, they were shipping it to the state of Massachusetts, where they were storing it in refrigerated warehouses that they were leasing in the state of Massachusetts until it got to be bottled. Then they sold it in New Hampshire, so you could drink the beer here. You just couldn't produce it or manufacture it here. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in business that we were losing in the state of New Hampshire because of a crazy regulation. Now I'm happy to say this actually got a lot of press when we went there. And because of that, the legislature filed legislation this past session, and they finally got those regulations off the books. So Red Hook is saying, hey, the state of New Hampshire is doing something to become more business friendly. But that's just one niche area. We have to look at regulations across all businesses and say, how are we going to become a more business friendly state? How can we end some of these needless regulations so that companies will want to do business here? So those are two things right there that I would say if we did that would improve our economic environment, lower the corporate tax rate, and end a lot of the regulations on small business. Second thing is two migrations I like to talk about. One migration is the number of young people that we're losing in the state of New Hampshire. New Hampshire's lost more young people, 18 to 34-year-olds, than any other state in the country per capita over the last 10 years. We now have a higher median age than the state of Florida. In fact, we're the third oldest state in the country right now. And this is a problem. This is a trend that has to be stopped immediately for two reasons. One is because as our population gets older, healthcare costs continue to go up. And number two, as young folks leave our state, companies that are here or that are looking to New Hampshire are going, well, geez, the pool of skilled labor in the areas where we need it, it's getting smaller. There's no reason why it should be shrinking right now because we have great schools in this state. We have great high schools and great post-secondary schools, but the kids are leaving because once they graduate school, they realize that the high-paying jobs that I talked about earlier in the 21st century, whether they're in advanced manufacturing, the high-tech industry, the biotech industry, healthcare-related field, financial services, they're not growing here in this state right now, and a lot of times they're having to go south of the border to find work. So what I've said is that we have to become much smarter and much more strategic about partnering the business community, the private sector, with our schools, our post-secondary schools, whether it's the four-year institutions, the community colleges, the VOTEC centers, the high schools, and making sure that the two are talking to one another. That the businesses are telling the schools, these are the programs you need to be coming up with and putting students on that career path so that we know that there's skilled labor down the line right here in New Hampshire so that we don't have to look elsewhere for that skilled labor. And secondly, it's a win for the students because if they're getting trained in the areas where the businesses of the 21st century need them, they can get a job right here in New Hampshire after they graduate school here. There's a great model of this already happening up in the Hanover area. You have a company called Hypertherm, which does precision metal cutting, and they're leading the world in this kind of technology. It's plasma and laser technology. They've been around for over 40 years in Hanover, never have laid off one employee in that entire time. But one of the smart things they've done there is they've teamed up with a community college in that area, and they created a program that students go into for 2 years. They get trained in the areas where Hypertherm needs them, and then after they graduate, guess what? They literally walk right into Hypertherm. And this is a win-win. It's a win for Hypertherm because they know there's a steady stream of the skilled labor that they need coming out of the school so that they can keep the workers coming in. But it's a win for the students too because they're going to school in New Hampshire. They're then working in New Hampshire, and hopefully they're going to be raising their families in New Hampshire as well. And a company like Hypertherm, they'll even pay for the students to go back to school and get their 4-year degree after they come in there. Because today we've gotten smart. It's a lot easier today to transfer credits from the community colleges to the 4-year institutions than it used to be in the past. And the other thing too is we got a deficiency in trades. You know, we don't push enough students to go into the trades today, and there's such a deficiency in those positions, whether it's being an electrician, a plumber. These are jobs that are in high demand, they're good paying, they're highly technically skilled jobs. And I say at the high school level, we shouldn't necessarily push every student to go to the 4-year route if that's not what's right for them. We should be honing them where their talents are. And if they're good at working with their hands and they're interested in the trades, we need to make sure there's apprenticeships, internships, or whatever available for them at that level so that they can go into that area because we're going to need them for the future. So we're not doing enough of that right now. If we did do that and got smarter and more strategic about it, then I believe we could keep more of our young people here after they complete school. But there's another migration happening that we got to stop. And it's probably very sensitive to a lot of the folks in Salem and in Hudson and a lot of the border communities. And that is the amount of people that commute out of state every day to go to work. New Hampshire, second in the country per capita on the amount of people that commute out of state every day to go to work. Any idea what state leads the country, by the way, in commuters? Shout it out. It's actually Maryland. And they're all going to the great place of Washington, D.C., place we love. But in New Hampshire, primarily, they're all going to Massachusetts. My dad's one of them ever since 1986. Plan wasn't, to work in Boston his entire life, but he's never been able to find comparable work here in New Hampshire, so he's had to commute to Boston every single day. And these folks are all paying income tax to the state of Massachusetts. Wouldn't it be great if they could both live in the greatest state in the country and work in the greatest state in the country as well? But guess what? We're not going to attract the jobs here unless we become a more business-friendly environment. It goes back to what I said in the very beginning. It's more advantageous for a business owner to own their business in Massachusetts right now than it is in the state of New Hampshire. So one of the things I would do as governor is I'd be very aggressive about calling up CEOs of businesses. I said every week I'd like a call list on my desk of CEOs in the state of Massachusetts that I can call up myself and say, this is the governor of New Hampshire calling. And I want to know, have you thought about doing business in New Hampshire before? Why or why not? And if you haven't, what could we do as a state to make it more attractive for you to do business here? And oh, by the way, did you hear we're lowering our corporate tax? We're deregulating small business. We're training students on the career paths with the skills that they need for the 21st century jobs, and selling them on why the state of New Hampshire is the best place in the country to own a business. But we have to overcome these other challenges first. We have to put the right policies in place if we're going to make it attractive. One of my metric would be, I'd like to be governor of all Patrick's worst nightmare. And I say that because I want him to know that I'm shamelessly going into his state and poaching jobs from the state of Massachusetts and bringing them up to New Hampshire. There's no reason we can't do that. It's happening right now in Wisconsin. If you look at the number of jobs that have left northern Illinois and gone into the state of Wisconsin, it's amazing. Why? Because the states are going in two very opposite directions in terms of their business taxes. Wisconsin's becoming a much more business-friendly state. Illinois is not. And companies are mobile. They'll go to the path of least resistance. And so there's no reason why companies from Massachusetts or from Maine wouldn't move into New Hampshire if we became much more business friendly. The last piece I want to touch upon, there's many things we can go into and you can look them up all on my website, but is the issue of health insurance. This is a huge issue and it's killing small businesses right now. Again, I'm a small business owner and right now out of pocket a year I pay over $17,000 for health insurance for my wife and I and our 3 small kids. But many small business owners have seen the cost of their health insurance go up 30–40% year over year over the last 5 years. And putting aside the federal stuff for a moment, there's reasons why this has happened in the state of New Hampshire. And there's a way to start lowering the price, again, if we put the right policies in place. But one of the things we've done is we drove out all the competition of health insurance carriers in our state. We used to have over a dozen that were competing in our market. Today there's essentially 2.5. So there's essentially a duopoly on health insurance carriers, and they're just fixing the costs up where they can. In fact, if you go on Anthem Blue Cross's website right now, and you compare comparable plans in the states of New Hampshire, Virginia, Kentucky, you will see that the costs are less than half in those other two states than they are in New Hampshire right now. Why? Because in New Hampshire we have all of these mandates on service mandates in the state. And you may say, well, it's great that we have the mandates, but let me tell you the difference. If you wanted an individual plan in Virginia, all right, they don't require maternity coverage as one of their service mandates. So if you wanted maternity coverage on an individual plan as a rider, you would pay $71 a year and extra on your insurance plan. Same plan in New Hampshire, an individual plan, to have maternity coverage as a rider, $650. That's what the mandate's done on group insurance plans. And you know what? If you're a 25-year-old male and you're not married, you probably don't need maternity coverage. But a lot of times you don't have that choice right now in our state. So what I've said is, number one, allow the insurance companies to let businesses offer flexible plans to their employees based on what their need is. If you want the plan with all the mandates, you can purchase that. If you don't want the plan with all the mandates, you can purchase a cheaper plan. But allow that flexibility for them to offer it to their employees. And the other thing I'm in favor of too, open up the borders. Allow insurance carriers from outside of the state of New Hampshire to compete in our market. Bring more competition into the market and help bring down the prices that way as well. So those are a number of the areas that I see are challenges before us as a state where we need to get more economically competitive if we're going to entice more jobs to grow here and move into the state as well. But I want to speak specifically before I end to what I was going to call the elephant in the room, but we're essentially in the elephant. So, you know, I have analyzed and researched this issue 6 ways to Sunday, and I've come up with a proposal and a plan that I believe is a viable plan, is a practical plan, and one that I can fully support and get behind as governor in terms of the future of Rockingham Park. And here's what I've said. I believe we can have a plan that allows for 2 licenses for casinos in the state of New Hampshire. And my only stipulations on is, number one, that each go out to a fair bid, because I don't believe we should be picking winners and losers in the state. So 2 licenses that would go out to a fair bid. And number one, that we have a strong regulatory infrastructure in place before any casinos are built, because it's been shown in the states where it's been successful, they have that regulatory infrastructure. And that number 2, any revenues derived from the casinos don't go directly into the general fund. Because I don't want to see government grow and more spending grow as a result of the casinos. But instead, what I've said is a number of things we could use it for. We could use it for infrastructure improvements, finally finishing the widening of I-93, which is so desperately needed. Because if we want more commerce coming into the state, you got to be able to get into the state. And so we have to finish that project. Use it to offsetting business taxes. Use it to offsetting the statewide property tax. I think those are all viable options of what to do with the revenue. I just don't want to see it going into the general fund. But it's more than just having the practical plan for it as well. It's also having a commitment to working with the legislative leadership to usher it through and getting it passed. And I say that because it's not good enough just to say, well, I support it, but I'm going to let it see if it comes to my opponent supports a one-place plan of just putting it at Rockingham. We know that's not viable in the legislature. They've tried that before. The legislature is never going to go for that. And he's also said he's personally opposed to it, which means that he's not going to work with the leadership to get it through. I will work with the legislative leadership, and I believe that my plan I'm proposing is a very viable plan for the area and would work to finally bring expanded gaming to Rockingham Park. And I'm committed to that for the folks here in Salem. But at the same time, it will be obviously a competitive bid. So that's my plan for that. I'm more than happy to take extra questions for that. And I'll leave you with this before we open it up. It's one thing to have really good ideas for the state and to have a long-term vision for the state. But you also have to make sure you have a governor that doesn't just have the ideas, but also has the know-how of having worked through state government to get good policy passed. And that's where my background and experience comes in, and what I believe uniquely qualifies me for the position, and that I've been in the state legislature, been elected to office, and advocated for good policy while I was in there. Having worked in the executive branch, having worked to make nominations to various executive branch boards and commissions, having run a state agency and gotten good reforms on the inside from having done that, but also having advocated successfully from the outside as well for good business policy. The governor's office, it's a 2-year term, which means there's no time for on-the-job training. You better know what your plan is when you're going in there and how you're going to go about executing that plan. And I certainly wouldn't need any on-the-job training to do that. I would know what to do on day one, and I look forward to working with the stakeholders, with the legislature, and listening to all of you on how we can make this a better state. So thank you all very much for your time, and I'll be more than happy to open it up to questions.
Before we get to the audience with questions, the Chamber of Commerce in Hudson and Salem have a few stock questions that are going to each of the candidates. Once they're done with those questions,